We ask for wisdom for those who bear the load of making decisions with widespread consequences. We pray for those who are suffering with sickness and all who are caring for them. Remember those who died. We ask for protection for the elderly and vulnerable not succumb to the risk of the virus. We pray that mischief and misinformation will be curbed so that fear and panic may not take hold in our hearts and minds. As we exercise the good sense and discipline required for these times, may we also approach each day praying for the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Amen. Let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021, and Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021 to be confirmed.
Speaker, I beg to move that those minutes be taken as read.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor, Mr. Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Honorable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay, in the name of the Honorable Marshall Cattle, MP, Minister and Minister of Economic Affairs and Investment, the Barbados Non-Reimbursable Technical Corporation, number ATN/JF 18339BA, improving the institutional frameworks for integrated coastal zone management, national risk information planning systems, and sustainable climate resilient coastal infrastructure. I'm also commanded to lay the non-reimbursable financing agreement number GRTER 17578BA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank, acting as administrator of a EU-specific contribution sustainable energy investment program.
Government notices, private members notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42.5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government businesses.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 1. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the second reading of the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Amendment Bill 2021.
Honorable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I imagine that today's debate in Parliament could be greeted by a mixed reaction from some. And the reason I begin with that is because the history of cannabis use in the Caribbean, dating back certainly to over 100 years, is one which has moved from a benign state a century ago to an abhorrent state starting prior to the 1960s and then firmly in the 60s and thereafter. History and research shows, Mr. Speaker, and this chamber has touched on those things before, that cannabis has, as far back as 100 or more years ago, been seen as a therapeutic, much like Sir C. Bush, One Dirty World, and all those kinds of things. At some point in time, and we don't need to go into that particular history now, the view of the international community began to see cannabis in a negative light and as a pernicious drug in itself. They also saw it as being a gateway drug to other drug use. That is the attitude, Mr. Speaker, that has dominated the legal landscape, not just of Barbados, but for most of the Caribbean and for many other countries across the world. In recent times, however, there has been a shift in the prevailing winds as far as cannabis use is concerned. And that shift comes from many directions. It is now accepted that cannabis is an aid to certain medical conditions. There were early reports that cannabis use was very helpful to those individuals who had to take the HIV cocktail. People are now, and that includes Barbados, looking at the whole area of medicinal cannabis as not just a good thing in itself, but as an opportunity for economic advancement and enfranchisement. In Barbados today, there is still, though, an attitude towards cannabis use which seeks to condemn individuals as being criminals and the worst of the worst. Mr. Speaker, I'm not here to try to convince anybody of what particular stance they should take on cannabis use. Those are deeply personal matters. But I am here to bring to this chamber an initiative that we feel as an administration is important not in terms of what our attitude towards cannabis use is, but our attitude towards the users of cannabis. You know, Mr. Speaker, they say hate the sin, but love the sinner. I think that is that's correct. And that perhaps is a good place to begin. I certainly don't want Barbadians to be, somebody's device is on. Yeah. I don't want Barbadians, sir, to be criminalized for something that we could otherwise treat to them for. I don't use cannabis. I'm happy to say that I've never used cannabis. But there's a generation of our young men and women, whether university or any of our other tertiary institutions or high schools, who have experimented with cannabis use. I have sat in places as far away as Canada and been in the company of lawyers. And I suppose personal anecdotes aren't exactly frowned on in this chamber, but I remember going to Canada years ago, sir, and as a youngish lawyer, and I was entertained at the home of some other Canadian lawyers. And we had dinner and some friends came over. And while I was expecting to have a short beverage as my post-dinner satisfaction, one of them pulled out some marijuana. No, sir, I hate to tell you that I was the only black man in the crowd. And all I could think of was, if the police come in here, you know who they're gonna hold. He come from Barbados and is weed in this house. But you know, sir, in their mind, they didn't see themselves as drug users. For them, it was a recreational thing, and they were quite cavalier about it. I was the only body who had reservations and felt awkward. Needless to say, I managed to get a taxi back to my hotel in fairly short order. I've also had similar experiences in places like Jamaica and other places in the Caribbean where for them, drug use is, cannabis use it takes on a whole different aspect. What is important, though, has to be the recognition that criminalizing cannabis use is not necessarily the solution for us. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me remind this chamber, lest anyone should begin to squawk. In our manifesto, we have committed to the Barbadian public that the matter of legalizing cannabis use is a matter for referendum. We are not resiling from that at all. We committed to it in the manifesto. We spoke about it on our platforms every night during the last election. And on that matter, we have remained resolute. When it comes to the question of should Barbados legalize cannabis, it would be a matter for the people of Barbados to weigh in on and decide. But that is to be distinguished from what we're talking about here. Section 6 of the drug abuse, it is actually called the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, establishes that the use or the possession of cannabis, that's what I should read down. The possession of cannabis is a criminal offense. Plain and simple. And it is to be visited by the harshest of penalties. But in the same way, Mr. Speaker, that we recognize that things change in our society, we have to ask ourselves, is this the appropriate approach in 2021 for our young men and women? Let us put it into context, Mr. Speaker. A person who is today found with a spliff, a joint, whatever you want to call it, if caught by the police, is likely to be arrested. After that arrest, he then has to go through a trial in the magistrate's court. If he is found guilty, he now has a criminal record which can only be expunged after 3 years. That is the process, sir. So we can look at it from both sides, because everybody in here represents constituencies where we see teenagers. And when you look them in the eye, you know that you are not dealing with somebody who is a criminal. You're not dealing with somebody who has the animus of a vagabond. More often than not, you're dealing with somebody who just fitting in with the crowd, going along because they ain't got nothing else to do, because that's what all of his friends are doing. And for the mere possession of a joint, a spliff, a marijuana cigarette, that young man or young woman then has to contend with a trial, which in the best of times is going to be a horrific experience, and then with a criminal record which will prevent him or her from getting a job in many places. You know, it has become par for the course now for many businesses, many employers in Barbados, to tell employees, bring a police certificate of character. I know young men who have degrees, Mr. Speaker. Imagine that. We educate them, we pay the economic cost to send them to university, but because of a conviction for a marijuana cigarette, what is it that weighs more mightily in the scale? Not his success at the University of the West Indies. That is what should really be weighing in the scale, you know. That is what should be saying, this is the man of promise. But what tips the balance is the the one joint, the conviction for the one joint that he might have had and been convicted with at 18, but has still gone on in life to excel in the area of academics, people with promise. So we say, hate the sin, but love the sinner. Mr. Speaker, every single day, our police officers are dealing with a large number of young men and women, some 14, 15, found in possession of marijuana cigarettes. Every day, our court system is clogged with a large number of individuals coming before the court for possession. Now, there are people who will not be as well informed as the members of this chamber. But I'd like at this point to say that for over a decade now, Barbados has had something called a drug treatment court. Because in the minds of our administrators, both the last administration and our administration on the eve of 2008, because when it was last AG, the drug treatment court, we began to formulate it. Because as a government, we understood that you do not necessarily have to convict somebody when in fact what they need is treatment. So we have had now for over 10 years a drug treatment court which sees the individual who is charged with possession of drugs having an opportunity to go through counseling and so on and bypass the ills of a conviction. So, and I think that's a point worth making, because that drug treatment court, we started under our last administration prior to 2008. The last administration continued with it, and it is still with us. And it is an important signal that instead of just focusing on the criminalization of an individual who is in possession of drugs, the counseling and treatment of that individual is what should be paramount. So in a sense, what we are doing here today is a natural consequence of what has been the prevailing position in Barbados for the last decade. But the point about the drug treatment court is that you still got to get the charge. You still got to go before the magistrate. Then you get shunted into the drug treatment court system. And yes, that is a good thing, but you're tying up police officers' time. You're tying up court time. You're using up state resources with an incredible value to deal with an issue of a joint that costs, I don't even know what a joint costs, $5? $5? Okay. So we have a choice. Inflation apparently hasn't set in. I do not know why the members of this chamber would be so intimately familiar with the current price of a marijuana cigarette. I'm happy that I am not. I will inquire no further. But the point is that, Mr. Speaker, every day we form judgments based on a cost-benefit analysis. Every day we do it. Do we do this road or do we do that road? Do we fix these houses or do we fix that houses? Do we follow this particular track of government expenditure or do we take another route? In many instances, the decision is contributed largely by cost-benefit analysis. What is the greater good that we can do for this money? Put another way, can you get more bang for your buck? Well, let's work out roughly a few dollars, and there's nothing scientific about this. But a person found in possession of a $5 cannabis cigarette, he's taking up police time. So let's assume that the police time is valued at, I don't know, let's say $50 an hour. So he's taking up police time. Police has to write a statement, all that kind of stuff. He has to go to court and give evidence. Then you're taking up the magistrate's time, another set of valuable time. And then, Mr. Speaker, the lawyer that the family has to pay. Remember, the offending material is worth $5. And then the psychological impact on the young woman or young man, because now he got a criminal record. So there's a cost to that too. And there's a cost to keeping that person out of the system. It's cost to all those things. But the offending material was worth $5. What's the cost-benefit analysis? One avenue is to take that person through the drug treatment court, yes, and that is not moving. That is still there, and we support it. But as an administration, we recognize that criminalizing our young men and women for the possession of small amounts of cannabis is not necessarily the best approach. Now, what do we mean by criminalizing? Well, I said earlier that the moment you get a conviction, it is recorded that you have been convicted. It is recorded that you are a person who has fallen far from the law, and no, you can't get a certificate of character to get a job on a cruise ship, to get a job in most places in Barbados. You can't even be a security guard. There's a feeling that you shouldn't be a prison officer, you shouldn't be a police officer, you shouldn't even be a teacher. None of those things. There has to be a better way. We didn't come upon this in the dead of the night or wake up and had a brainstorm. Jamaica, long ago, took that attitude, took that position in relation to possession of small quantities of drugs. And in 2015 March, they enacted a piece of legislation which had the effect of saying essentially that if you're found in possession of a small amount of cannabis, that you will not have a conviction recorded against you. That's the essence of it. St. Vincent, Mr. Speaker, followed suit in 2019. And in St. Vincent, the amount of cannabis, the limit, is 56 grams. So that if you are found in possession with an amount of cannabis less than 56 grams, they give you a ticket. They refer you for counseling. And that is pretty much the extent of it. And this is an attitude, sir, this is a stance that is being taken by most governments that are thinking, that are looking for alternatives. Mr. Speaker, in our bill, we are I want to go through the provisions of the bill quite carefully, sir, because I want to make it clear that we are not decriminalizing the possession of any cannabis. We are not saying that if you are in possession of cannabis that you are not committing a crime. But we are saying that if you are in possession of less than 14 grams of cannabis, that we will treat you differently. You see, sir, we still have to acknowledge that it is a crime. We still have to acknowledge that it is a crime. But we don't have to do with you what has been done over the years. So, Mr. Speaker, let us look at how we are approaching it. A person who is found in possession of 14 grams or less If the police have, let's rewind. If the police have reason to believe that you have 14 grams of cannabis or less in your possession, what we're doing is serving you with a notice. And this notice, sir, offers you an opportunity of discharging any liability by allowing you to pay a fixed penalty. So, sir, the point is, you could have gone to court, go through a whole trial, pay a lawyer, all those kinds of things. But we're leapfrogging that process, and we're saying, look, young man, young woman, you're found in possession of 14, 13, 12 grams of cannabis. Come take this, go and pay $200. $200 fine. So it is still a crime. There is still a penalty. The penalty far outweighs the value of what it is that you had. Far outweighs it. But it allows you an opportunity to throw yourself on the system's mercy and say, mea culpa, I am guilty. And you go and pay a fine. The original process, Mr. Speaker, would have taken sometimes years, because as a lawyer, I know you, long time you didn't do all those cases. But you have juniors who would be able to tell you this simple drug possession case, the man had 2 joints, and 3 years we still in court. Countless adjournments. And you go through this entire thing, going to court week after week after week after week after week. The police come, the magistrate come, there's some problem, the matter adjourned, the case didn't get heard. Takes up a lot of time. And then at the end of it, they get fined $500. No, sir, we're cutting out all that. And we're simply saying you're found in the possession of cannabis. Here's a ticket, pay $200. So, we will have achieved one of the early principles, one of the foundation principles of law. You have a crime, and there's a penalty. And the penalty should fit the crime. And in our view, a $200 fine allows you to do that. But in the case, Mr. Speaker, of a person who is under the age of 18, different and very important considerations apply. You see, sir, it is known medically that marijuana usage in younger brains has a deleterious effect on that person's development. But so does a criminal record. So does a criminal record, sir. And the criminal record does not have the effect of steering that person away from drug use. The criminal record does not have the effect of showing that person another way. The criminal record shows only that the government is a wielder of a big stick, and we are going to administer this stick to you. And hope, sir, hope that it has a positive effect on you. You know, Mr. Speaker, when that case comes on 3 years from now, you get charged with a joint today, and a case comes on 3 years from now, at which time you get fined, where is the redemptive value in that? What is the positive reinforcing lesson to be learned from a penalty that is imposed 3 years down the line, and in fact, for all of this time, you are in a straitjacket because you have a charge pending before the court. Can't get a job. No, sir, you know, a government's obligation to its citizens is to provide them with every opportunity. Sir, there's a hotel that employs a lot of Barbadians. And a lady was asked for a certificate of character. But somehow, she was interviewed, impressed the people, and they hired her right away. And she breathed a sigh of relief because she had a cannabis charge. But you know, HR, sir, at some point in time, somebody from HR, member for St. Peter, is going to be reviewing the file 2-3 years later, and they're going to be saying, hey, Patsy, we got to get this file. Let me put the file in order. Patsy, we were reviewing your file. Good job, you know, we like it. We reviewing your file, but we need the certificate of character. Don't know what happened, but it's not here. And then the phone calls start. They start calling everybody in this room. What do I do? How soon can I get an expungement? Mr. Marshall, it was just one marijuana weed out by the Dunks tree, and on and on and on and on. This is not a Pearl and Fred story, by the way. But, you know, this person, and I've seen it, this person, their job is on the line. Everything about their performance says, you are a valuable customer, a valuable employee. But there's a rule in HR that says, unless you have a certificate of character, you do not have a chance. And then we got to try and rush through. And HR knows no, and they got to hide up. And sometimes they give you 2 weeks to get it, and you can't get it, and the job gone through the drain. Somebody's brilliant career. And you think I'll be a brilliant career as a CEO, be a brilliant career as a gardener, as a maintenance technician, as a plumber at a hotel. That person now is thrown out. No, that's not what our society should be doing. In my view, I don't want us to get points for coming in after the fact and trying to help that person, because that's after the fact. Our success as an administration should be measured with how we protect that person, which is our priority before the fact. So by giving an individual an opportunity in short order to pay a penalty, there's a quick correlation between offense committed and penalty. Offense committed and penalty. You feel it at the same time. How many of us, as children, you do something wrong, and your mother always wants to be the darling and says, wait till your father get home. But you glad. You glad because you gone back doing what you're doing. Because daddy come home, hopefully tired, eager to remember you. Because that's the risk you run when the punishment does not follow quickly. But what we're saying here is, we serve you with this notice. You have a limited amount of time within which to go and pay the penalty. And as I said, if you are under 18, we are requiring you to go to counseling. Now, in my view, money spent by an administration on trying to counsel a young man or woman who has started out on the road of drug use is money that is much better spent than the cost of dragging them through the judicial system. I said it's about costs and benefits, but it's also about our values. You know, when my son was a teenager, his mother would insist on searching his bag. You know, daddies tend to be a little bit more liberal, and they can say, well, you know, let the boy go, let privacy, and so on and so on and so on. Happily, nothing was ever found in the bag. Okay? But every single one of us either has a teenager, has had a teenager, or is connected in some way to a young man or woman who could be negatively influenced when he goes on the blocks, when he goes to the school, when he goes in the bus stand, when he or she goes to our institutions. how do we want to manage when crisis arises? Do we not feel that our approach should be to sit and talk, find out what's going wrong, try to reinforce positive behavior, and to keep that young man or woman away from crisis? It doesn't have to be with drugs, it could be with anything. But our approach with our children, our approach with the people who are close to us is always what? This young man or woman has promised, let's give them another chance. If that's what we want for our children, for our nieces and nephews and cousins, why shouldn't we want it for other people's wards? To me, it's logical. If we stand in a position to help by trying to erase negative behavior and reinforce positive behavior, then we have a better chance of a good outcome with our young people through counseling, through all kinds of things, intervening measures, than dragging them through the criminal system. And that's what this is intended to do. No, this is not about resources, so don't let's, as I said, don't let me get tied up. How we deal with our young men and women who find themselves on a road that we would rather they not embark on, is not just a question of measuring how much money you spend in the court system. I have said that is there. I think it's important that you recognize it. But this is not a case where the government is saying, man, it's cheaper. We're looking for a cheaper way. We still have to pay the police. We still have to pay the magistrate. But we're looking for a better way. And that better way is presented through this fixed penalty bill. So, Mr. Speaker, if a person found in possession of 14 grams or less of cannabis, in addition, if you're under 18, in addition to paying the fixed penalty, you have to attend the National Council on Substance Abuse for assessment and undergo counseling for such period as the council recommends. The National Council of Substance Abuse has been doing great work in Barbados. They are accustomed dealing with our young people. In fact, they have done a wonderful job over the years in our schools. In our schools. And I want to thank them for doing this. I believe that the National Council of Substance Abuse was the brainchild of this administration over 20 years ago. Because we understood then that intervention is better than trying to deal with it after the fact. So we're drawing on our experiences that we've had over the years with the success of this institution. So we could have said you should be sent to counseling. We could have said you should be sent to psychiatrists. You could be sent to all kinds of things. But instead we're saying, no, you are to go to our homegrown experts, people who do this every single day, if you're under 18. Because we recognize the best thing for you is to reinforce the positive and help us to erase the negative. But if you are considered by the police force, by the police officer, to be addicted, he also has the opportunity to refer you for counseling. So there are two sets of people that we consider to be, I don't want to say fragile, but who consider special treatment. If you are under 18, or if, in the view of the police officers, you have an addiction problem. The solution with people with addiction problem is not the big stick. We know we have to find a better way of dealing with them. Now, sir, there's always the opportunity, there's always the possibility that an individual may say, not me. Officer, you ain't find me with nothing. That's the first reaction. He may say, officer, this is not cannabis, this is something else. If that situation arises, then the course of the law will be followed. Because you're saying I am not guilty. It is up to the police officer then whether he proceeds. But we anticipate that a person will take a common sense approach. We don't want anybody to plead guilty if what they have in the pocket is Cersei Bush. That's obviously not on. But you will have your day in court for the court to determine what that is. But you know, the police are not new kids on the block. They've been doing this for many years. And if the substance is not cannabis, a simple test will establish that. And you know, then there'd be no issue. Mr. Speaker, the point is that a person who disputes under this bill, a person who disputes that he's in possession of cannabis can be prosecuted. He can be prosecuted. And in the event, you know, there was always a magistrate who would say, I can reward you for not wasting the court time. If you don't waste the court time, I'll give you a slap on the wrist. And it's well known. People who do their own mitigation say, well, sir, I didn't waste the court time. I pleaded guilty. So that is still a feature of our criminal practice. But in a situation where a person who had the option of the fixed penalty but persists in going through a court trial, then that person would expect to receive a higher fine. So, sir, what is the essence of this? And I think I can recap it for you in just a few words. This is not a bill that legalizes cannabis possession. It is still a crime. When this bill is passed, it will still be a crime. But what we are saying is that a person in possession of a minor amount is not trafficking, is more of a risk to himself, and there are those who will argue he's at no risk to himself either, but that's a discussion not for here, but for another day and another place. But the point is, it is still a crime. We've not legalized cannabis use. So take that off of the table completely. And if you need to see how it is not a crime, it is because there is a penalty. That's how you know. If a person does not commit a crime, then there's nothing for the police to stop him for. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The possession is still a crime, and there is a penalty imposed by the state for its possession. So this is not legalizing cannabis use, cannabis possession. People who want to say, well, you're going easy on them, I don't see it as going easy on anybody. I do see it as the state taking a different approach, one that does not result in creating hundreds of people with criminal records on an annual basis. And, you know, sir, The Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act is under the responsibility of the Attorney General. When a person applies to have their record expunged, and mere possession will be expunged, you have to go through a process, submit documentation, submit supporting. Many of you may have written letters letters in support and testimonials and so on. You go through a whole process. And then the police still have to get involved in it because it's referred to them to say, well, are you keeping your nose clean and so on. But again, there's the cost-benefit analysis. There are literally thousands and thousands of people who have these kinds of charges, who, if they're all applied, would simply inundate the system. Now, if we say that we are not going to criminalize you for a small amount, there's certain consequences that will follow. One of those consequences is that you will end up without a criminal record. Now, let me explain how the statute deals with that. We establish that it's a crime. We establish that there's a penalty, a fine to be paid. But what we go on to provide is that as long as you pay the penalty, as long as you pay that fine, your record is deemed to have been expunged. So in effect, no criminal record is made against you. So a young man who, after we pass this bill, caught with cannabis, pays his fine, will not have a conviction recorded against him. That gives the opportunity for him to establish himself in life without this sword of Damocles hanging over his head. And that is important. You know, sir, we came up in a society. I mean, as a little boy, I lived with my grandmother, loved her to pieces, but somehow or another, I was always afraid of getting beat. I was just, I didn't think I was a good little boy. But you know, there was I'm sure we all had it. We had a fear of a few things: castor oil and getting licks. I mean, because just about anything that you do as a child, somehow or another licks would follow real fast. In fact, as you get licked, you know what you do. You know, so you were always in fear of. Barbados has come a very long way from that. We're not saying don't punish, but we're saying that punish should be reasonable. And in this bill, we are providing that your record is immediately expunged so that you don't have to go through the horrors of getting an expungement in later days. The other thing about this bill is it takes into account those individuals who are underage, and it takes into account those individuals who are suffering from addiction. They get special treatment. It preserves the right of an individual to say, I'm not guilty. I want my day in court. We can't rob you of that. It's fundamental. We can't rob you of that. But to the extent that we allow you to have your day in court, it is your right, then you don't get the $200 fine anymore. You now got to deal with the magistrate who will impose a fine on you in his or her discretion. Mr. Speaker, this bill, when passed, will eliminate a lot of the paperwork that our police officers have to do in respect of relatively trivial offenses. It will remove from the court system a large number of matters which clog up an already burdened magistrates' court. Our magistrates' court, Mr. Speaker, there are some of our districts that will have 14,000 matters in a year. When you consider all the criminal matters, what you call the PIs, the preliminary inquiries, all the traffic offenses, all of these things, and then there are the civil cases, all of which go before the same magistrate. So this will also have the salutary effect of removing from the magistrate's docket a large number of matters by dealing with them administratively. Now, the time for a referendum will come, Mr. Speaker. And there are those people who will say that this, and they've said it. So let's deal with it. They've said that this administration, by passing the medicinal cannabis legislation, then followed by the sacramental use of cannabis legislation, and now followed by this, is inching its way, ever so surreptitiously, to legalizing. Nothing can be further from the truth. The Barbados Labour Party is holding fast to its commitment to consult the people if we get to that place. But we recognize that there are other matters that are important. It is important for the state to provide economic opportunity and economic enfranchisement, and medicinal cannabis is a well-respected and precious opportunity, and we are not at all embarrassed that we're going in that direction. We had consultation on it, and so on. We gave the Rastafarian community, because of the religious right that they have, the right to practice their religion under the Constitution, we've given them that. But that is a limited right, limited purpose, limited to place. Now, we understand that there are some who feel that we should have gone further, and they're entitled to that view. But our view, Mr. Speaker, is that we are prepared to do what we have to respect your constitutional freedom, but remember that you do not live in a society by yourself. In fact, one of the things about the Constitution is that your rights must be balanced against the rights of other people. And so we've given you that particular opportunity to practice your faith in your way without anybody knocking to lock you up. But you also have to respect the fact that the Barbados government has signed on to international treaties relating to cannabis use, and we have laws which must also be applied. What we're doing here is not moving us a step closer to anything. It is not moving us a step away from anything. It is consistent with what we're doing with our drug treatment court, that is, trying to find ways of moving people out of a purely criminal adversarial process which has little redemptive value. I said, Mr. Speaker, that St. Vincent has 56 grams as their amount. 56 grams. We've not gone anywhere near there. If you got 56 grams in Barbados, you will face the courts. They say Barbadians are conservative. That may be. But I think that at this point we recognize, we've looked at it, we've consulted, and we say 14 grams, that's personal use, that's a small amount. You know, that's nothing to feel that the rest of the society is in peril. So let us keep that figure. In Jamaica, we understand that even though they've passed the law, nobody prosecutes anybody for possession of ganja in Jamaica. I don't know. I'm not saying that that is a fact. I'm saying that that is what I'm told. Barbados continues to focus on its citizens. And in the same way that a Barbadian who is engaging in one unhealthy habit is entitled to have the state come and say, obesity is your problem, let us work on it. High blood pressure is your problem, let us work on it. Living in unhealthy conditions is your problem, let us work on it. We feel that we should adopt a similar approach where a young man or woman has possession of cannabis. So let us work on that too. We don't criminalize any of the other things. We try to find ways of changing people's behavior and reinforcing the positive. And this approach is one, Mr. Speaker, that is based on that form of governance. I am pleased to bring this legislation. I don't see it as being groundbreaking in any way. I don't see it as being groundbreaking precisely because as its administrative companion, we have been doing exactly this for the last 10 years with our drug treatment court. We've been sending you for treatment. That's what we've been doing. And if you succeed, if you go through the treatment regimen successfully, then no conviction is recorded against you. That's what happens. You get charged, you go through the drug treatment court, go through the entire training module, the entire counseling module, and then we are satisfied that you are now better equipped to move ahead with your life on your way. So what we're doing here is a similar thing, except we are using statutes. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't think I need to detain the chamber any longer. The amendments are small, but I think they will help to change the Barbadian landscape. We are simply criminalizing too many of our people, and we are committed to dealing with the situation, dealing with the problems. It is still a crime, but you don't have a record recorded against you so long as you pay the fine. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to engagement with the chamber, and if there are any issues, I'm happy to clear them up when I wrap up. But I beg to move, sir, that this bill be read a second time.
Honorable member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please turn your mic.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill, an amendment to the Drug Abuse and Prevention of Control Bill. This is a continuation of the social justice platform that this government has embarked on to transform this society, not only at the economic level, but at the social justice level as well. We all know, sir, unfortunately, what has happened over the last year in terms of the global pandemic that has, of course, struck this country as well, and the efforts and determination by the government and people of Barbados that has turned our mind from aspects of the economic transformation and, in a way, social justice transformation, sir, which were even announced in the throne speech last September. But I'm happy, sir, that this bill has been brought before us by the learned Attorney General today, because, sir, it is part of our connection with human reality in Barbados. We know, sir, that up to 100 years ago, in fact, possession of cannabis and certain of its derivatives was not a crime. I think in the 1930s it became a criminal offense, led, I believe, certainly by the developed countries, by the United States of America. We know of great impetus in the 1970s in the developed world to make possession of cannabis an illegal a crime. I think in the 1960s they had an international treaty from the United Nations which criminalized cannabis possession. And we know, of course, of the war on drugs by the United States government during the 70s and early 80s. So essentially, let's face fact, targeting people of African origin, sir, and people who were poor. And it cannot be denied that criminalization of possession of cannabis and certain derivatives has unfairly disadvantaged poor people all over the world, especially in the Western Hemisphere, and people and black people, sir. And this is the reality that cannot be denied. We know that people of different economic classes have been able to get away with smoking cannabis and possession of illegal drugs that haven't been brought to court because of who they are or whose children they may be. As well, sir, people who are middle economic income blacks. And therefore, sir, this is what we're doing here today, is doing justice to people of the lower economic brackets of this society, who are invariably those, and black people, who are brought before the court system and who acquire a criminal record because of possession of small quantities rather of drugs. Sir, I was enlightened by what the Attorney General said of his experience when he was in Canada at the time, because it brought back to me, sir, it would have had to be 1985 when I was a student in Ottawa, and I experienced very similar circumstances. So where I would have been one of only 2 black people at a sports party. We were watching a major sporting event, North American event, and cannabis started passing around, sir. And I confess, sir, as I've said in this parliament before, I've never used any legal drug, never even smoked a cigarette. That's not one of my sins, sir. And I, like everyone else, have sinned. But thankfully, that's not one of mine. When the substance reached me, sir, I passed it on to the next person. And it's going around, and I passing it on all the time, sir. And I, like the learned age, he said, realize that this is time for me to leave. And I left myself, sir, because that is not who I am, sir. But I say that to agree with the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, is that in certain communities, and that was, 36 years ago, like I said, this is the norm. And it is part, as we know, all of us are representatives of people in here, we know that it is part of the norm in certain areas of each of our constituencies. This is the reality of our country and indeed the world. And the question here, the fundamental issue here, sir, is that we need to keep, especially in today's age, 2021, as many of our people out of a conviction of a crime as possible, sir. The reality is that 85% roughly of potential employers in this country require the production of a police certificate of character before they can employ an individual. And the person is competent, qualified for the job, merit the job, sir, and is denied the job simply because they have, as many of our people have, a conviction for possession of cannabis or some illegal substance, sir. And what is the result of that, sir? That an individual cannot obtain employment, whether in the private sector or in a government institution, except for certain government departments. And we know, sir, the National Conservation Commission, for example, I think the Sanitation Services Authority will still employ persons with a criminal conviction because, I mean, that is, if but for that, they may not be able to get employment. And that leads to frustration, sir, because an individual now can't support themselves, far less their family or their children, and could lead, and in fact, as we know, does lead in a lot of cases to further involvement and a conflict with the criminal justice system, sir. And we have to be fair as leaders politically in this country. Cabinet, of course, sets the policy. Parliament passes the laws, sir. We have to give people a chance, whether it is a second chance or a third chance, to survive in this country and to sustain themselves, sir. And this is part of the whole thrust of this administration, and I know the Honorable Prime Minister has led that philosophy to engage in penalties that can be civilly instituted, in this case, fixed penalty, rather than registering a criminal conviction against an individual. Sir, I am a believer of John Stuart Millian philosophy that the law should generally only intervene where you are harming other persons, but not harming yourself, sir. And if an individual chooses to use cannabis, sir, personal use, he's harming himself, sir. I disagree with them, with that individual, sir. As I said, that is my personal view. I've never used any. But they're not trafficking. They're not supplying it to others. They're not giving it to children, to youth, to corrupt their brains, sir. A fixed penalty is adequate. Is an adequate imposition of a penalty in a case such as this. As the learned Attorney General said, sir, it's not that Parliament is here today doing away with criminal conviction, but I mean, there's still a $200 fixed penalty to be paid within 30 days. But Parliament is doing away with registration of a criminal conviction which can prevent and hinder access to a job, sir, employment. It could bring stigma to an individual, sir, because we know how it goes in a small island such as Barbados. Everybody knows who goes to court, sir, and there's a stigma attached to that in terms of a conviction. And the section 6B, which speaks towards the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, where the person who is convicted for possession of not more than 14 grams their conviction would be deemed to be expunged and rehabilitated. That, sir, is transformative aspect, sir, and works in favor of many of our young, especially young constituents from poor communities who will not be now disadvantaged because of a registered criminal conviction. Perhaps in his wrap-up, I know the Attorney General, in wrapping up, mentioned, of course, that he would be there to clarify in his wrap-up any ambiguities. Perhaps he can speak towards, for clarity, the clarity of the public, whether those presently with convictions of possession of small amounts of cannabis, 14 grams or less, whether their convictions would be automatically expunged as well as a result of this amendment which is before us today. The Attorney General, learned Attorney General, indicated, he didn't say as much, but the process which he spelled out, sir, to get convictions expunged, and in this case, for possession of small quantities, it is after 3 years of conviction, is too much tied in with red tape, sir. I mean, yes, you have to make an application. There's a board that looks at it, sir, under the Ministry of Legal Affairs. Has to go to the police. The police do investigations to see if the individual has been out of trouble and has kept in conformity with the law since his conviction or her conviction. I believe that they go and inquire among people within a community about the person's modus operandi, and it takes, a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes more, after the application, and before the application could be heard. And then what? The board still has to make a decision. Too much red tape. In the meantime, the applicant is being disadvantaged. As I said, can't get a job from 85% of employers in this country. And the whole thrust, sir, should be that persons as well who have previously been convicted and who therefore, even though they have paid their penalty to society, whether by a custodial sentence or by a fine, that it still registers on their criminal record and is a detriment to them getting a job. And certainly, sir, I would wish the Attorney General to speak towards this so the public is clear on this issue in relation to past convictions and the expungement of those past convictions. The issue, sir, as mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, of the role of the National Council of Substance Abuse is very important and significant in this area, sir. And the National Council of Substance Abuse, sir, and I join him in commending that organization. I think came into effect 1995 or so. It's done tremendous work with inadequate resources on many occasions, staff, I believe, of about 20, and has done tremendous work in terms of engaging our youth and intervening in drug abuse, especially among young people in this country. And I don't know, sir, if the Cabinet would give greater resources to the National Council of Substance Abuse, because, of course, their role will be enhanced as a result of these amendments. And I agree, certainly, with the amendment that would make it mandatory for an individual under 18 years of age who has been caught by the police with possession of less than 14 grams of cannabis, the mandatory requirement that they be assessed and they undergo counseling with the National Council of Substance Abuse. I believe that they have 30 days to contact the NCSA, and their parents or guardians also have to be involved, sir, which is good because it means they're still minors, and their parent or guardian has to be involved and has to have knowledge in their act and in the whole process of rehabilitation of this individual. Because statistics show, reports and investigations by the National Council of Substance Abuse that you have children as young as 7, 8 years old engaged in drug abuse in this country. And of course, in a lot of cases, sir, as we know, as parliamentary representatives, it is with the knowledge of their parents or guardians. In fact, the parents or guardians, in a lot of cases, give them it. Or the communities, the neighborhood where they live. Adults know. And as I said, sir, I'm not accused. All of us understand and have knowledge of what goes on, but we have to limit this. We have to. It is part of our responsibility as politicians to limit the drug abuse among young people in this country, sir. Because our youth must understand that this is not what we should be. And even though it may be accepted within their households or within their circle of community, it is not what is good and what is best for them. And therefore the state is correct in seeking to intervene, in tying in assessment and counseling from before age 18, sir, in these situations, even while we are seeking to do social justice to individuals. In addition, sir, those over 18 years old, under this amendment, if the police officer arresting or rather charging, confronting, has reasonable cause to believe that the individual has an addiction to cannabis, that officer may direct that person to attend the NCSA for assessment and counseling. And I would trust that, again, the police will use that discretionary power given to them, because the word is may, it's not mandatory as in the case of those under 18, but I would trust that police officers would use their discretion in favor of directing the adult individuals to be assessed and counseled by the NCSA, sir, because we have the state has a duty, as I said, to seek to minimize the spread of drug abuse in our country. The learned Attorney General spoke of the conservative nature of our people, and we know that a lot of us are conservative in terms of our thinking and our actions. He pointed out, sir, that yes, St. Vincent has set the maximum at 56 grams, while we are setting it at 14, a big difference. Trinidad and Tobago, sir, also has this law and have set it at 30 grams. Jamaica, I believe, and I'm speaking subject to correction, I believe has set it at 28 grams. I know Guyana is also, if it hasn't passed an amendment to do the same as what we're doing today, is contemplating it. but if the learned Attorney General or could explain why we've come so low at 14 grams. I mean, there must be a philosophical basis for it or a scientific basis as to whether, for example, 20 grams shows that you may not be, it may not be for personal possession alone. So as I said, I am a novice at these things. This is not one of my areas of expertise. But the question of 14 grams, some may question why 14 and not, let's say, 30 or 28. A fundamental issue of what we're doing today, sir, is saving of court time. And you, sir, know as well or better than any or most of us in here what that means, sir. One day, an individual told me they had been summoned to court. It was a traffic offense, and driving, I believe, beyond the speed limit. And they came into court saying that they're going to fight this. You know, this ain't going down. They're not pleading guilty and paying any fine just so. But when they walked into court, sir, and saw how many people they had there just to collect this $300 fine or wherever it would have been, sir, you had a magistrate, you had two court clerks sitting either side of the magistrate, you had a stenographer, you had about 3 police officers, and the individual said, but it can't be that 6 people here sitting down to collect a $300 fine, but that don't make any sense, quite frankly. And I standing up here 3 hours outside the court in hot sun, right, to pay this. Well, look, let me plead guilty. Wherever the magistrate wants to find me, of course, sir, they set tariffs based on the speed limit, the $300 or so. Let me think, because this ain't worth it. 6 people, time, I mean, the taxpayers' money that got to pay them for me to fight this case now after all of this. So, sir, the issue of time saved is very important. We know, especially in this age, sir, COVID, how important court time is. And it is incumbent on the political directorate to come up with ways and means of saving court time. We know about the backlog of cases in the magistrate's court, in the high court, whether criminal or civil, sir. And this is certainly a move in the direction of saving court time, which means, in effect, saving money, which is so important, financial resources of the state, especially in this age, as we have fought and continue to fight over the last year in buttressing the security of our people, both in terms of health and in terms of economics, sir. And I look forward, sir, and I know that the Cabinet, I presume, is still considering it, the issue of putting civil penalties as well for illegal vending. Not so sure where that is at now, but I'm sure that there's still a trek for that to be on its way to Parliament, civil penalties rather than criminalization of vending on the streets, etc., because again, that is another aspect, sad aspect of our history, just like possession of cannabis for personal use, sad aspect of our history where black people of poor background have been criminalized for use, for just trying to make a living, sir, trying to make $1 vending. And certainly the time has come for the law to intervene to just have civil penalties for illegal vending as well. The learned Attorney General spoke about the drug treatment court, sir, and yes, this came into effect under the last administration, where the concept would have been started by the previous Barbados Labour Party administration. And it is a court, sir, as you well know too, sir, which needs to be utilized to a more extensive path than it is being now. Of course, the individual, the accused person has to consent to go before the court. And in a lot of cases, especially females, do not want to consent to go before the court. I mean, they have children. But so it's something, and I'm appealing for those who come before the drug treatment court or who have that option, and for the magistracy as well, sir, to utilize that court, more than it is done right now. I mean, when I was Minister of Home Affairs, I attended a graduation ceremony of it, sir. I think they had about 95% were men. As I said, sir, females don't utilize it as much. But we know, and studies have been prepared about the role of women within the drug abuse system, sir, and it is of concern, it is of growing concern to the state, and I'm appealing for that court to be utilized a bit more than it has been since it has come into effect, sir. The role of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, CICAD, of the Organization of American States needs to be commended, sir, because they've given the Barbados government tremendous technical advice and support over the years in this whole process. And I know that what we're doing today would commend itself to that body as well. Sir, in wrapping up, I would just like to ask as well, and maybe the learned Attorney General can speak to it in his wrap-up, as to the National Anti-Drug Plan. When I was Minister of Home Affairs, we were finalizing that plan, and in fact it had been brought to Cabinet, but amendments were requested to take into account recent developments of drugs and the concoctions that have been used. And we know this, and you know, sir, you're, in addition to a renowned attorney at law, you're also a social scientist and social welfare expert. And we know that almost every month they have new concoctions of drugs, try to beat the system, sir. And I believe that having a philosophy, a strategy for, at national level, for an anti-drug plan is important. The last administration had one a 5-year plan that expired. So it's a case of this administration now renewing that strategy and philosophy at national level, so that the public can be aware of what we are doing. I mean, there's no doubt, sir, that drug dependence is a public health issue as well. And the health of a nation is the wealth of a nation as well. And, this, of course, plan is underpinned by science, and of course, many stakeholders have to be involved, civil society, not only government, non-governmental organizations, in crafting such a policy. And it would be useful, I think, perhaps for this Parliament to be told as to where we are at with that plan, sir. And finally, sir, the issue of the Barbados Drug Service. We know that under the Act which informs controlled drugs and prohibited drugs, etc. That act hasn't been updated recently in terms of lists of drugs. And this is something that we have perhaps fallen behind in. We know, sir, that as we all know, over the last year, the concentration has been, as well it should be, as well it has to be, in terms of tackling and defeating the global pandemic of COVID. But in all of this, we still need to keep abreast in terms of the list of controlled drugs, etc., within the context of drug abuse. And I know that a committee had been set up at cabinet level when I was still a member of cabinet, looking into this list, sir, and seeking to update it. And it would be perhaps useful for Parliament to be informed as to where that is at within the context of the Barbados Drug Services lead in that particular aspect of the fight and the war against illegal substance abuse. So, sir, I am happy to speak in this debate in support of this amendment, which, as I said, sir, is part of the extension of social justice in this country. We know, of course, there is a Social Justice Commission, sir, and when the Honourable Prime Minister was Attorney General, she would have formed a commission on social justice, and it is only right, sir, that, especially in this day and age, we give our young people, our people from working class backgrounds, an opportunity, a second and third chance to be able to progress and survive in this Barbados. And part of that is in terms of gaining employment in a situation where possession of a drug record could militate against such employment. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Philip North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few words. This is one of the few times I'll take my mask off because I really want to be heard. Mr. Speaker, we are here to debate this bill, and debate, I think, is the best option. We need to debate it, particularly because in my mind, although I may agree with a lot of the bill, I think it comes with certain ramifications which we need to address. At some point in time, we need to address it. Some of these ramifications, apart from the decriminalization, which we all heard the pros for, I have issues and ramifications with respect to religion. I don't have too much of an issue with religion because I think we don't have the right to dictate how people will practice their religion in their own quarters. There are ramifications with respect to education, with respect to our children, the youth in our society, and society as a whole. And in essence, despite the Honourable Member for St. James North saying harming oneself, it does have ramifications in terms of harming the individual who would be caught with this marijuana. As I said, I have no real concerns or argument with the part with religion, but I want to go on to the ramifications with respect to education. And how, for one, and I have heard concerns, how do teachers, or how are teachers expected to deal with children? And there are children that are at school at 18 and 19 years old, by the way. In this environment, especially when there's online schooling, enough distractions, some of them get bored, both teachers and students, some of them are distracted. How do teachers deal with a student coming in to the classroom after using marijuana? And let us not fool ourselves. There are many people who look at this bill as permission to use marijuana, whether it be 10 grams or 14 grams, a lot of people are looking for this bill as permission to use such. So I'm worried about that phase. How do teachers, for one, deal with that? Are we prepared to put counselors, psychologists in the schools? Are we prepared to put more of these in each and every school? Because it will be needed. What about our children? Yes, we are decriminalizing more than 14 or more grams. But in essence, that's telling me that my sister, who is a little older, can use 10 grams. And I'm seeing it in my household. My cousin can use a little less, and I'm seeing it. The government is not prosecuting at that level, and I'm seeing it. So what's really wrong with myself using it as a 10-year-old? And it happens. These are some of my concerns. How do children deal with it? And in essence, that goes to the parents and the rest of society. How do we deal with that problem? Are parents comfortable with this initiative? You know, I'm hearing about Jamaica and St. Vincent with respect to the amount they are using. And I heard arguments. Yes, I've been to a conference in Trinidad maybe 2 years ago, and that was one of the issues. And the parliamentary representatives there from both St. Vincent and Jamaica were proud of the fact that they're decriminalizing it. And I asked one, how would you feel if your son comes home with the amount of marijuana that they have decriminalized? And the first thing before I thought, she said, not at my house. So it's okay to say this in here, but as a parent, I am worried about it. How do I defend the fact that somebody comes at my house and I know and I disagree with it, but the law says that they're allowed to use it without criminalization? This is one of my issues. Are parents comfortable with it? It won't be long. And society as a whole, how will we accept it? How will we deal with somebody smoking? We don't agree with it, but it's within the legal amount. Is it okay for me as a medical practitioner to take a break from a patient? Excuse me, sir, I need to go and smoke 10-ounce spliff, coming right back. Would that be taken as normal? Would that be acceptable in my world, for instance? And I know there are doctors that smoke, and they're not always of sound mind in practicing. Would that make it okay for me to go to work and take a break to do this? When I know my patients watch me and emulate what I do, would it be okay for you to go to court, take a break, and smoke a spliff, Mr. Speaker? These are things that are knocking about in my mind. I'm looking at the legislation, and I'm seeing police officers given the right to say what they think if a patient is addicted to marijuana. But the jury is still out on where marijuana addiction starts and ends. How does a police officer, and I'm looking at it from the point of view, lately a lot of the lawyers, many of you in here, yes, but a lot of the lawyers have been picking down our legislation and finding holes. If I, as a person, decided to disagree with the police officer and I go to court, can a lawyer decide to say, did you wear the marijuana? How do you know the difference between 14 ounces and 14 grams, and 12 grams? How do you know that this what's the name, the people you represent, the accused, was addicted to marijuana? What gives a police officer the right to decide, I'm a psychologist now, and I think you're addicted to marijuana? Some of us doctors don't even know, because it's a complicated world. Are we going to train police officers? Are they going to walk with scales? Are they going to... This is my issue. How does the police officer get into the realm of deciding psychologically if an individual is addicted to marijuana? This is one of the problems I'm seeing coming up in court. And I'm not being the bad John. I'm looking for the areas of concern. Because I believe in any parliament, there has to be, and it's a fair parliament, there has to be the other side that we can consider. That's my belief. That is one of my issues. And I heard the honorable member for St. Joseph speaking about the cost-benefit ratio, the cost-benefit analysis, sorry, and how we would decrease the cost of the courts, et cetera, et cetera. But what about the cost-benefit analysis for the psychiatric hospital when our youth see it as permission for them to use it? I have seen cases where hallucinations, one spliff, whether it be laced or not, I don't know the nuances of it. One spliff can send a person hallucinating till they. I had one that came in my office and broke the mirror. I had to call the police. What are the cost-benefit analysis of that? What are the cost-benefits analysis to the National Council of Substance Abuse, with who I'm sure will see more cases, where the house is often full? Do we have the money and the funding to do this? Do we have the time? Do we have to spend basically time in educating the public where marijuana is concerned? I said it before with respect to the medicinal marijuana. We need to educate the public in what marijuana does to a young mind, the dangers of marijuana use and the other substances within the marijuana that can harm you, whether it be vaping or smoking. We need to educate, I think, first of all, before we can take this step fully, or while we are taking this step, educate the population. Get someone. In terms of the harms of marijuana, because a lot of them don't know it. I've seen people that told me, when I take marijuana, my mind is clear, and I can write the best essays and come up with the best plans. On the other hand, I've seen people that did it once and was convinced that fleas all over the body and would never use it again. You can't only show the good side of it, the decriminalization of it. With respect to self-harm, I think that has to be considered, despite the honorable member for St. James North. People are hurting themselves every day with marijuana use. It is not necessarily, that's why laws are put in place to protect the individual, not only the rest of the public, but to protect the individual. That is why using cocaine is illegal, because you don't want people dying of cocaine use. There are reasons why you're smiling on Mr. Speaker, but that is why laws are put in place to protect not only the rest of society, but the individual as well. The other question I had is, at what point does it become criminal, the use of 14 grams become criminal? Why I say this, when this was first discussed way back on Facebook, one of my Facebook friends, she's a little crass, but the thought that she was trying to express got home to me. She says, okay, $200, let me pay $1,000 up front, that I won't have to go to court. A lot of people see this as a joke. At what point? I use marijuana now, I pay my ticket, $200. Next month, they catch me, I pay my ticket, $200. Next month, till the whole of December, at what point do they say, let's go to prosecution? I have not seen it here in this legislation. I may have missed it, but I have not seen it. So correct me if I'm wrong in your wrap-up, AG. But there has to be a point, and I'm wrapping up now, I'm always short, where we have to draw the line somewhere. The Attorney General said we have no plans of making marijuana legal. Fine, great. But who's to say in another 20 years, some government, I believe probably none of us would be here, but another 20, 30 years, some government decides once you're not harming somebody else, you are free to use half ounce of cocaine. Who's to say that? Who's to say that some government in the future, another 4 or 5 terms, decides let's make marijuana legal? We really can't say that. No, we can't really say that. These are some of my concerns. We need to draw the line and decide upon what makes the fabric of our society. It cannot always be of what the other jurisdictions accept. I firmly believe that Barbados has its own identity and social fabric. The church comes in, and we're always asking the church to participate in matters and to lead the youth. How did the church get in there? What will people like the Honorable Leader of the Opposition get up and tell his congregation when this is passed? Is it okay for you to use marijuana if it is under a certain amount. These are my concerns. We need to still keep our social fabric intact and not allow it to be ripped. We need to draw the line between marijuana use and not using it. We need to, we've already decided upon therapeutic facilities, which I'm yet to understand, and vaping, when there are issues with vaping as it is with lung disease. We have to decide on the social fabric with respect to things like same-sex unions, decriminalization, marijuana. There are a lot of things that, yes, the international community accepts, but at the same time, we are our own people, and at some point, we have to say this is wrong or right or acceptable or unacceptable. So I am hoping that at the end of this, in the wrap-up, I can get some answers. I think it is worthwhile to give the opposing side, because that's what makes law. If we could fix it to almost to be bulletproof, that is half the battle. We need to listen to the public. Even though this is not with respect to marijuana legalization, but the public needs to have a part in something like this. I'm hoping to see views at some point from what people think. Teachers need to have a say how they will deal with students. Right now, I watch online sometimes, and students all over the place, some of them sleeping, some of them looking at the fly that just passed the room. How do we deal with students that are otherwise distracted by marijuana? And it happens. It happens whether we like to admit it or not. There are children under 12 that are using marijuana, and it's detrimental to their brain development and to their health. So these are my concerns, Mr. Speaker. I end here with the hope that I have triggered some sort of response and get the brain juices working, but this is how I feel about it. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will try to be as brief as I possibly might be. You know, one has come to expect, even in our parliament, which reflects a certain level of innocence compared to other parliaments, that members on opposing sides will react in certain ways, sometimes fairly harshly, to opinions coming from that other side. I have to admit, it is a little bit distressing to me today when I observe what I consider to be, and I don't apologize for saying this, the apparent disdain, apparent contempt with which the contribution of the last honorable member who spoke was met by members from her own side. I mean, I think, Mr. Speaker, you can rule me out of order if you would, but I think each of us has been sent here by the people we serve at a constituency level to express our views in their interests as we see it. And our opinions are to be met with a certain level of respect. If the fact that we are on opposing sides reduces the expected level of respect, I guess sometimes that is understood and may even to some people be acceptable. When it comes from members of your own side, I think that that really goes beyond, is a step too far, and it is distressing. And I will say that and stand by that, because the level of apparent disdain and contempt for an alternative opinion to me just now was quite obvious. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for St. Joseph, when he made his presentation on the matter before us, made a very valid point with respect to what I consider to be one of the major deficiencies or defects in our justice system. And that has to do with how the system itself tends to criminalize many of our young people. system itself turns out prospective criminals, further pushing them towards undesirable activity, which ends up a tremendous cost to the government and people of Barbados. But the Honorable Attorney General referred to criminalization from the point of view of a record being established, a record being made public, which can work against you in your attempt to acquire work-related opportunities and other opportunities. And that is truly one of the negative outfalls from the way the system today, the justice system, especially with reference to young people who fall afoul of the law. That's one of the negative outfalls which result from that. But the matter of criminalization, to me, is more than simply the establishing of a record which imperils your opportunities for finding later on gainful employment and such like. The fact is, the institutionalization of many of our young people is a training ground for the development of further habits of criminal activity. That is the aspect of criminalization that I would want to stress, in addition to that which the Attorney General, Honorable Member St. Joseph, put on the table. We send people into institutions, purpose of incarceration, and thereby, because of the way our institutions are now structured, they are very much part of a criminal culture that serves to sharpen those habits. And when they should have come forth from those institutions, rather than come forth better people who have been rehabilitated, they come forth people who are further criminalized. So I am suggesting to us that if this legislation seeks to improve the system of justice, especially with respect to penalties meted out to our younger people, to avoid not only them having established a criminal record, but to avoid them further becoming criminalized, then it is something worthy of support. We cannot continue to criminalize our young people. That has so many ramifications, so many negative consequences flow from that, not only with respect to themselves, but with respect to their productive or otherwise roles in society as parents, fathers, and mothers in the world of employment, as well as responsible citizens of communities and districts in Barbados. We cannot continue to whimsically or triflingly incarcerate our young people. If the legislation is intended to address that broader issue, then there's some merit attaching to it. There is also, and I think the Honourable Member for St. James North came close to addressing that issue, and I really am dealing with the broader issues around this thing. There's a matter of the discriminatory dynamic involved with the business of dispensing justice in Barbados. The majority of those who are normally found with or in possession of these kind of quantities of illegal drugs, the majority of those who are brought before the courts, the majority of those who go to our penal institutions as a result of being in possession of these amounts of this type of drug usually come from working class, poor communities in Barbados. In a broader way, we continue to lament the fact that it still exists among us a practice in our judicial culture that there seems to be quite clearly a discriminatory dynamic in operation. And I don't attach it to color necessarily. There may be an element of that, but it is more, in my view, a situation that relates to the matter of class. And so you got poor black boys poor boys from down in Hawkins and down in Richmond and in Garden Land, other places like that in Barbados, who are arrested with these small amounts, brought before the courts, and penalized as a result. While others, some of them professionals, respected practitioners or practitioners of respected professions, let me put it like that. Some of them occupying healthy status in our business community are not the ones who are caught, even though they are in possession of larger amounts. They are not only involved with the actual usage of it, but involved in trafficking of drugs, and they are purveyors of this evil in our society, and it is those people themselves who ensnare those of the working class who are more given to the use of smaller amounts for personal pleasure, or engage in the selling of smaller amounts just to make ends meet, to keep body and soul together, to feed the two or three children whom their father or their mother. Yet, those who are guilty, apparently so, of bigger offenses are untouched by the shortened arm of the law. Its reach does not extend to them. And where perchance it does extend that reach and it touches them, then the system does not fully bring to bear its weight upon them, because they don't face the courts for some reason, or if they do face the courts, avenues are found whereby they may enjoy their freedom. I'm saying, therefore, in a much broader frame, if this legislation helps to address the imbalance in our justice system with respect to how people of different classes, different stations in life are treated, then it has some merit and is worthy of consideration, because we have to take any discriminatory practice which may obtain either in actuality or at the level of perception in Barbados out of the practice of dispensing justice in this country. I want to support very strongly, and in fact is the first note I have on this piece of paper in front of me, the concern of the alma member for St. Philip North. It is all well and good if we say we don't want to criminalize people, whatever reason we advance for not wanting to do so, and therefore we are not going to send people to prison for small amounts of marijuana in their possession for their personal use. But obviously, if the law is as it is in this case, becoming a little bit looser, a little bit more liberal, and I do take the Attorney General's point that this does not say that the use of marijuana is not a criminal offense. The legislation does not say that. But it does create a more liberal approach to how it is responded to. If the law becomes a little bit more liberal, a little looser, then of course one would expect that there's going to be greater practice, perhaps, of the use of marijuana. Concern, therefore, about the impact upon minors for several reasons. And this legislation makes a distinction between those who are, I think, over 18 or over 16, those who are younger. Concern about the impact upon minors. And we have to be careful. The alma member for St. James North raised the whole idea of the basis upon which certain stipulates in this legislation were established. And he raised it in, I don't want to say a frivolous way, but in such a way as I saw quite clearly, it evoked a little bit of laughter from some of his colleagues. But if one were to give more serious reflection to it, one would have to suggest that when we are introducing legislation such as this type of legislation, these types of legislation, we have to be concerned that we take a studied approach. We don't simply move because we think it is a popular thing to do, because it constitutes part of the current trends across the region, whether it's in Jamaica or St. Vincent or Trinidad or Guyana or elsewhere. But what in the Barbadian context is the situation, and what does research and study throw up for us that should guide us in the formulation of policy? So what research and studies have been done as to ascertain what is the likely impact of a potentially good measure upon minors in Barbados going forward, upon the school system in Barbados, which is already under significant threat. The school has become quite a hostile environment in Barbados. Hostility from student to student among student population, hostility between students and teachers. We've already seen violent episodes being part of the outflow from that environment and the hostility and tensions that obtain. What level of study and research has been done to suggest to us what is the likely impact of this further liberalization of the law with respect to the use of marijuana upon our minors' population and upon the school system? How is it likely to affect performance in the schools? I think this is what the honorable member for St. Philip North was saying. To those who would have listened with a keen ear, they would have heard. What is the likely impact upon performance of our? We already are in a situation where we lament the very poor quality of performance of too many in our system, where 30% of those who are exposed to the benefit of free education in Barbados actually find success with respect to certification. 30%, I think, is the last figure I heard. How is this likely to affect performance in school if its use becomes more widespread because the laws are seen to be more relaxed? What is, we talk about cost-benefit analysis, that's one of the elements introduced in this discussion by the honorable member of St. Joseph, but we put significant investment in education in Barbados, more than anything else, education and health. And the question is, how does this, to what extent does this have the potential to negate the intended expectation, the anticipated positive results from our investment in education? How is it likely to impact discipline among the student population and among staff who may not be as mature, perhaps, as they ought to be with respect to the use of this? High level of teacher frustration is being experienced in Barbados for many, many reasons, and to what extent are we likely to see the level of teacher frustration added to as a result of this? And then at the end of the day, these young people given to drug use are parents. Some of them are parents multiple times. And to what extent are we going to see a further degrading of the quality of parenting in Barbados, because young people are caught up in a world of drug use which does not offer for them prospects of a brighter tomorrow, and by extension for this country as well. All we are saying here, all I'm saying here, is that these are the types of things to which we have to give our thoughts. These are the types of things to which we have to give some study and make some reflection. One wonders the extent to which, before this legislation was put into formulation, that this became part of that which guided that formulation. I think that these are fair questions. The Honorable Attorney General made reference to the workplace environment, has implications for that as well, because it is one thing, well and good, for the government to bring legislation, this parliament to pass it, which says we don't want to criminalize people, we don't want to interfere with their employment opportunities, we don't want them to have criminal records which stand in the way of their getting jobs. But if the attitude of employers is not in sync with the intended purpose of this legislation, you have a problem, because you may not be able to keep your job, even though you have not gone to prison because you've been found in possession of a small quantity of marijuana. Then employer attitudes, that is also an important issue, which in my view has to be addressed, or has to be thought of. I know there are other enactments which would be brought to bear upon situations like that, and there are alternative recourses in action which people might have. But the point is, this is a cultural thing, and it's, as the Attorney General himself said, it is an aspect of our societal behavior today, especially among younger populations, about which there are strong opinions on either side. So employer attitudes would be something that I would be concerned about as well. Now, I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, also about the overwhelming of the capacity of the National Council of Substance Abuse, a critical institutional mechanism in this, because those who are found in possession of limited quantities are not now brought before the courts. You're given a ticket or a fine, and you are also required to report to the NCSA for counseling, etc., etc. Now, this institution has been doing a great job. I joined with the All-Member of St. James North and the Honorable Attorney General himself in compliments to that institution, but always been strapped for resources, financial resources, limited human resource capital as well. And you are now thrusting upon them. If we understand the scope of use among young people, and not only young people, the scope of use among people in Barbados of marijuana, if we everywhere we go, we're faced with it. Go to sporting events, especially football, you're faced with it. You pass through any urban district in Barbados, and I think the same is fast becoming the case of rural districts in Barbados. You smell it, it is there. People use it openly, freely. I don't even think sometimes the officers of the law are too bothered about it. I've seen that in some instances. But you are now saying that where these persons are challenged and are given a ticket, they are now required to report for treatment at the hands of the NCSA. I see an overwhelming of their capacity to properly respond to this. And that is a concern which I would want to register as well, despite the yeoman service that the officers there have rendered in the past. Now, the issue of treatment has always been of a concern to me, because it's one thing to lock up people, it's one thing to fine people or ticket people, but the capacity to offer treatment and the realization that there is a need for treatment, and that in many instances, we're dealing with a problem of addiction. I am not happy, not satisfied, that the efforts to date to treat to the problem of addiction, the efforts to date to provide psychosocial treatment for those who are caught up in drug use in Barbados are adequate or sufficient. I know of people who have been to a particular ward at the QEH. I know of people who have been to a particular unit at the psychiatric hospital. I've been there to visit people, so I know of those efforts. I've never been convinced that as a country, we have properly evaluated the business of addiction with reference to the use of marijuana. And on top of the use of marijuana, there are now popular other drugs which are very available to the public of Barbados, very much used and consumed across Barbados among young people. And I'm concerned as to the level of emphasis that's being put on treatment. The move towards a drug treatment court and facility is laudable. That's something I myself promoted. But the whole business of treating to a problem here, recognizing it for what it is, because in many instances, it is not a question of people caught up in a fad, and fellas just want to fit in with the group. Many instances, not just a peer group, peer pressure situation. I believe there's a level of addiction, and even from principal spokesperson on the other side today already, we heard that many people see the use of some of these more quote-unquote innocent drugs as a gateway leading to drugs which have a more deleterious effect upon people's systems, upon people's psyche. So I believe that in the matter of treatment, especially the whole issue of addiction in Barbados, is not only addiction to marijuana and some other drugs, there are other aspects of this problem of addiction in Barbados that we are not treating to as a society, and it's costing us. It's costing us financially, it's costing us socially. Ultimately, it costs us as a people, as a nation, because people's addictions are getting the better of them and driving habits which are undesirable, leading to behaviors which we would prefer not to see. Concern as well, Mr. Speaker, about the capacity with reference to the police. Police in Barbados are already undernumbered, inadequate numbers, not a sufficient complement of officers, short by 200 and odd. I think I've heard that figure made reference to. And we are operating in a context where those bent on criminal activity have been a little bit busier than in former times, which we have known. So we have seen that trend in criminal activity. The police have serious criminal priorities to address on their hands. And we are now about a situation where we are expecting of them to be able to establish this as a priority and have the capacity and the inclination, disposition to respond to this. I wonder if it is not located somewhere in somebody's thinking that this law will be observed more so in the breach, and that though it is on the statute books, ultimately the police will not bother too much about it. I hope that that is not the thinking, but if it is not, that I worry about the capacity of the police to have a regime of enforcement with respect to this by sheer force of the numbers. And I'm sure there's no one in here is in any doubt as to what I'm saying. Pass through any urban district in Barbados. Go to any football game in Barbados. You will go at any block in Barbados, and it is there. So the police will have to establish where this falls in their priorities and find the capacity, the extent that it constitutes any level of priority for them to respond to this. And then the business, as has already been mentioned, queried, determining quantities, determining whether or not a person is addicted. These are, I suppose, difficult areas to assess, to evaluate, but that is what is provided for. And I am sure that in the outfall from this, we will see where the deficiencies are. Now, I don't know if the fines are prohibitive enough, $200. Some people smile at that, get that from somewhere, perhaps pay to move on. If in fact the regime is so enforced that they're made to do so. There are too many instances where people get tickets for traffic offenses. They're never paid, and there's no follow through. Again, I hope it's not the intention that this law be observed more so in the breach, and that there's an eye of wink cast at it. I support the notion that there's somewhat of a deficiency in the provisions here, because you say where a guy is ticketed, you go, you pay your ticket, you fine, you get the level of treatment through the NCSA that is required, then your record is expunged. And you do that again and your record is expunged. And you do that again and your record is expunged. And I do not know if you will not have a situation where you end up with people making a mockery of the system. I wonder if this is not an instance where you could have applied a provision that gives a limitation, maybe 2, 3, 4 strikes, you're out. We've heard of that with reference to other things. But I would hate to know that the legislation is made a mockery of, because you can do what you please. You pay the $200, you get that from somebody. You sell some drugs and make it, pay the $200. You smoke at your car, you sell some drugs, you make $200, you pay fine. And your record is expunged. I think we need to make sure that mockery is not made. And I don't know why we're given 2 weeks to report to the NCSA. I presume that again is being guided by reference to some criteria. 2 weeks before you report to the NCSA. Concern also about the stipulation of further penalty for notices which are defaced or otherwise maliciously dealt with, because I know these things can easily be lost. There are paper documents which can easily be lost. And I don't know if that is covered, provided for in the thinking behind the legislation. But if it is clear that you have defaced, mutilated in some way, caused damage to the notice, which in some way affects that. But then what about a situation where it is clearly lost? And how do you establish that it is lost? There's some of the things that I'm concerned about. Now, Attorney General properly said, and the perception will always be there. And if you observe what's been happening across the Caribbean and elsewhere, when state authorities, governments have been minded to move towards a situation where there is liberalization of legislation with respect to recreational use. In other words, where you allow for recreational use of marijuana, it has been largely that 3-step process. And that is, you reform the legislation by providing for fines and penalties as opposed to incarceration. 2, you introduce legislation to allow for religious or medicinal use. And then the next plank is just a step away, where you allow properly for recreational use. Now, I take the Attorney General at his word when he makes reference to what the government has committed to vis-a-vis a referendum before this country goes to any consideration of legalizing recreational use of this stuff. My concern is, even if you insist that it is not an incremental step to take you there and that ultimately that is not your objective, we've got to be careful that we don't create, by whatever other planks of legislation we put in place, we do not create a situation where to all intents and purposes, without legalizing it, we end up having recreational use properly so anyhow. And there are some people who fear that that is what will happen. It has happened elsewhere, and I trust that it will not happen here. Those are my few thoughts on the matter for the moment, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was not in my seat, but was next to Minister Strawn, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, because I think many of you are aware that we're trying to settle the finishing pieces of the estimates so that they can be laid in this honourable chamber on Tuesday. And for that reason, I'm not going to be very long this morning, but I did want to speak and to contribute to this debate. Mr. Speaker, there is no major piece of legislation that does not attract divergent views. And this is just but another example of that. I was therefore smiling when I heard the leader of the opposition speak and start in the way in which he did, largely because having sat in that chair longer than perhaps most people since independence, I am particularly and peculiarly aware of the difficulty he might have felt with respect to wanting to appear as though the soundness of what we're doing is there, and choosing instead to read into body language, which I didn't read into. In fact, I heard a lot of applause when the Honourable Member for St. Philip North finished speaking. But I also felt that I needed to speak because I also appreciated that there are some people who may well wonder what the Honourable Member for St. Philip North was saying. But she's saying nothing different from what we discussed in our own cabinet. And she's saying nothing different from what we've discussed elsewhere on this journey. And she's saying nothing different from what the CARICOM Commission on Marijuana would also have reflected upon. Because like with most things affecting and related to human behavior, there are issues. And there is no perfection because human beings are, in their own right, not perfect. But what is before us is a judgment call. And it's a judgment call based on what we have seen the criminalization of marijuana do to hundreds of thousands of lives in this part of our world. And in our own country, easily tens of thousands of lives and the deprivation of opportunities for them, particularly as it relates to the criminalization. And they, quite naturally, are concerned that when that criminal conviction stays with them, their opportunities in life do immediately that and shrink to almost nothing. They are concerned in many instances that the documents and history reflect a world that these substances were legal less than 100 years ago in much of the region, and just over 100 years ago in other parts of the region. And I would invite others to go to the CARICOM Commission on Marijuana, which was headed by no less distinguished a person than Professor Rosemary Bell-Antoine, who I think is well known as a distinguished legal professor and a former dean of the Faculty of Law of the University of the West Indies. Some may argue that she's also known as the wife of former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, the Honorable Kenny Anthony, a distinguished legal mind in his own right. But that's not why she was appointed to this. That it also had included in it Professor Wendell Abel, who, for the members of Philip North, has worked for many years in Jamaica and the Caribbean as a distinguished psychiatrist, and is in fact the consultant psychiatrist at the University Hospital of the West Indies at the time when he participated in this. And then the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, quite correctly, he and I shared space in a ministry many moons ago called the Ministry of Home Affairs, in which he had responsibility and helped me with the National Council of Substance Abuse and other things, where we were able to ensure that and programs like the DARE program, which the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, when I was sharing a ministry with her in the Ministry of Education, Youth Affairs and Culture, would have worked on with me for a very long period of time. Then there is Ras Frank Tafari, who is the Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to Ethiopia, and a citizen of St. Vincent and Grenadines with a BA in History and Economics, and he would have been able to represent the position, for the most part, of the Rastafarian and Nyabingi movement. We had our very own Dr. Alana Griffith, a young, distinguished Barbadian sociologist, a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and a former employee of the government of Barbados, and has done extremely well. And we had Dr. Maxine Gossel-Williams, who was a senior lecturer in the section of pharmacology and pharmacy at the University of the West Indies. And of course, from the religious community, and I'm not sure if the Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows him well, but Bishop Simeon Hall, who was Pastor Emeritus of the New Covenant Baptist Church and Moderator Emeritus of the Bethel Baptist Association in the region, and has traveled extensively from the Bahamas right down to the south and all across the region. And then Mr. Dorma Harrison, who is a law enforcement specialist at the Institute of Criminal Justice and Security. Dr. Kishore Shallow, who holds a doctorate in business administration and works in the area of finance, and he has been a prominent voice for young people across the Caribbean as a former CARICOM youth ambassador. I took the time to read out who constituted that commission, because I want us to realize that the perspectives and skill sets in their own right were very broad, and took into account also a range of issues in what really is a very strong and seminal report worthy of reading. There is no one of us who can say with certainty anything. But we believe we have enough before us and decades of information, and I'm not even going to the international community, where a number of former heads of government and heads of state took this issue to the United Nations and did it because of what they feel was the injustices perpetrated across millions of people globally, and the majority of them black and brown, by the way, who have had an extraordinarily higher incarceration rate than those who come from privilege. And this, therefore, has become bound up in the notion of fairness and equity and social justice, or to put it in simple Bajan language, if there are two Barbaduses. For us, we believe that we reached a point where the level of injustice being perpetrated, not only at persons who are teenagers, but those who may be parents. The Leader of the Opposition just said it. There are a number of people, and the member for St. Philip North, and the Attorney General, member for St. James North, parents of necessity are not only those who want to take care of children, But regrettably, in too many instances, parents have been the ones locked up. And the deprivation of liberty, and this report speaks to it clearly, has meant that many families have never been able to recover because of the criminalization of the key breadwinner, and particularly where, in this report it says, in Caribbean matriarchal societies, where it is a woman whose liberty has been deprived. Now, I believe whether it's woman or man, the family is impacted the same. The evidence that the Attorney General and I believe Her Excellency in the throne speech would have given with respect to the extent to which this occupies, and Mr. Speaker, you know better than most of us, the volume of time that this takes up, to the chagrin of many, because other cases that ought to be assuming a higher and greater level of prominence in our criminal justice system are not pursued either at the level of enforcement or at the level of hearings in our courts. And there's a very real sense that those who are students of history cannot help but reflect, as have others who have read this report, that the parallels between this and prohibition, where there was a criminalization of persons for drinking alcohol, that really led to more criminality more than anything else, that comparison is very much there to be made and commented on. Now, Mr. Speaker, this government has made a very clear determination that we cannot continue to criminalize our young people. I'm not talking about how we're going to treat to the issue of people under 18, I'm coming to that. I'm talking about our young people, as the Attorney General said, who very often may have done something a little later on in life, want an opportunity. Opportunity is deprived of them. There's no doubt that this piece of legislation will also have consequences, therefore, for many who already have now a conviction for what is otherwise known as a spliff or a very small amount. And the Honorable Attorney General will deal with that going forward. We've also been very clear that in our manifesto, we agreed that we would introduce legislation for medicinal cannabis. We've done that. We've introduced legislation for sacramental cannabis. And we've done that, and we are conscious that there are those in the Rastafarian movement, as well as the case before the courts, and I therefore won't dwell on it now, who feel that they want to see full legalization. And that day may well come. But at this point in time, we committed in the manifesto that we would have a referendum on full legalization. Now, I'm the first to admit that the truth is that a lot of time has been lost in the last year because we've literally been focused on the pandemic and trying to keep Barbadians safe. But life still goes on in every respect in this society. And therefore, at some point in the future, there will be a referendum that speaks to the legalization for Barbadians to determine whether that's where they want to go or not. And I'm sure that a lot of them, because the one thing I noted very carefully is that there is no political divide on decriminalization on the part of all of the parties based on their previous statements and comments in this country. But on the issue of legalization, we have said as a party that even if, and the majority of Barbadians may support it, and it will pass, but we feel that if that is to be the case, then it needs to be a judgment of the people and not just the 30 of us in Parliament, because that is in and of itself a wedge issue. But on this simple issue of decriminalization, we believe that it is imperative that we stop turning people into criminals. And to that extent, this may be the first step. Well, there's some who say you should be able to move straight. And I say yes, if I was working for Mayor Motley, I know what I would do and what I would say and where I would say it and what I would be. But I'm working as the people's servant, representing the will of the people. And to that extent, therefore, all views first must contend. And that is why I say to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, don't get tired. Don't get tired. This party accommodates all views. His memory may be a little short, but it accommodates all views. And it has accommodated all views. The member for St. Michael East who wanted to speak has cursed me from this floor of the House. I have never cursed him back. In fact, I work with him. You understand? And there are others who have done it at different times. So let us be clear that that is not the basis upon which this parliamentary party operates. And there have been moments in time where the Honourable Member for St. Philip North has also shared perspectives that her colleagues have not shared. And that has not made her any less an honourable colleague to all of us. And there have been moments when I have not shared views that the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, when he was within the fold, and others who constituted the majority shared, that were different from my own views. And that is how a modern democracy in this country must work. But I go further. I think that the concerns are legitimate concerns. And the fact that we are seeking to stop people from being criminals for possession of a spliff does not mean that we must condone its usage by young people. And I think that we all have a responsibility. There is no young person who should be drinking alcohol at 15 and 16 and 14 and 13. There is no young person who should be smoking cigarettes or marijuana at 13, 14, 15. And I make bold to say that whenever I go into a community in this country, and I meet any young people who have any type of talent, and I see them near a bottle of alcohol, I'm sorry that the member for Christchurch East is not here because he would have seen me do it in Silver Sands. I address the people. I said, Breds, you know that ain't good for you? You really know that ain't good for you at this age? You play football? More often than not, they say yes. I said, so how many times you had to go into extra time? He said, man, it's happened sometimes. I said, well, when you go into extra time, if your lungs and your fitness not there, how are you going to win? If Usain Bolt and all of the other great athletes didn't have people looking out for them and telling them what you eat, what you drink, and certainly what you shouldn't smoke, from tobacco to anything, if you want to be at the top of your game. And these are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having. And I agree with the Leader of the Opposition on one point, for sure. And he and I have spoken, I believe, on previous times on the same point. That there is an issue with addiction and bad habits in the country. And the addiction is not just with cannabis. The addiction is to macaroni pie. The addiction is to pigtail. And I like pigtails, so I can tell you, I got to make sure that I don't eat it every day or every week for that matter. Because the older we get in life, the more we appreciate that balance. Balance is what carries us through safely. The former Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Peter, as he then was, used to say that he's not going to stop eating pigtail or pork chops because it only adds, for every pork chop, you only add 7 minutes to your life. Well, there are a lot of 7 minutes that were, you take away 7 minutes from your life. There were a lot of 7 minutes that would take away from my life because I like pork chops. But I also have had to discipline myself that you can't do it all the time. All of Barbados knows that I was a smoker of cigarettes for years. I started smoking at a young age, not that young, but as a late teenager, and continued doing it with the exception of 10 months until 4 years ago. So I understand the challenges of addiction with respect to things that people like. There are people who like liquor, who must have a rum or a brandy every day, or a whiskey, Mr. Speaker. There's some who believe that a meal without wine is not a meal. But I do believe, and perhaps the leader of the opposition will want to partner with me and all other right-thinking people, that there are some things that we need to be able to tell our people, look, cease and settle. Let me get this understood. The chronic NCDs, and it hurts me, and the member for St. Philip North sees it, I'm sure, every week. The extent to which young Barbadians are more at risk of diabetes 2 now. I suspect it's far, far more risk there than for most other things in their behavior. But because it appears to be benign, like child eat some food. You always humbugging the child about eating greens all the time. When in truth and in fact, all of us in here know that the digestion system needs it. And there are just certain discussions that we're not having. And that is why I've tried to insist, and I've asked again, I've asked the Ministry of Education, I'm going to ask the member for St. Thomas's ministry, there has to be, and the new Public Affairs Division in the Ministry of Home Affairs, there has to be a transformation of how we eat and how we drink. You're giving children juice loaded up with sugar all day. All of that leads to the same issue. So that when I say that we need to speak to our children and tell them, don't take a 6 for a 9. Is this going to be the first generation where children lead the adults? But then none of us in here that could have told our parents that you want to do X, Y, Z and get away with it without consequences. My father made it very clear in our house. My youngest brother was too small. It was me, my sister, and my brother in particular. And if you didn't say it 100 times, you didn't say it once. Any of y'all get in trouble in here with smoking anything. You could do what you want as an adult. But if you are under 18 and living in my house, do not call me. And he was a lawyer. He was the lawyer that people would be calling. So you had an immediate sense that you were on your own. Now, there are not many teenagers who will go against a parent speaking in those firm terms. That is if the parent has been consistent throughout that child's growth and development. But it does require a holistic approach, and the government has to undertake it. And that holistic approach has to be that, yes, we must do right by those who have been marginalized, and the marginalization is not just rooted in the immediate act of smoking or possession. Regrettably, it is also rooted in privilege and lack of privilege. We all know that. We all know that. But at the same time, as we try to solve one problem, we have to be mindful of the risk. And that is what I heard the member for St. Philip North saying, that there are risks. And that is what we discussed in Cabinet. In fact, it is fair to say, without breaching Cabinet confidences, that this matter came before us, what, about 3 or 4 times? And we sent it back each time to get it right with respect to the matter of persons in particular under the age of 18. Because like the report and like the conversations I've had with doctors and other things, we accept that a children's mind as an adolescent can be affected. Not the majority happens to, but it can be affected. It's like this whole issue with multi-syndrome infection, multi-symptom infection for the young kids. When I first saw it last year on CNN, it was about May or June, and they started talking about it and how it was affecting the organs of young kids after the fact of their having COVID. And you realize more and more that life really is about managing risk. And we're not going to get every risk obliterated or eradicated, but we have to do our best. And I'm satisfied that we have a duty to get parenting right. That's why I want, and we've lost a lot of the last year, I want to change the structures that we have in our social sector ministry in order to be able to allow them to treat the families as opposed to individuals. When you treat the individuals, you don't have allies in the fight. When you treat the families, you have allies. When you treat to the church, when you treat to the community groups and the cultural groups, the sporting groups, you have allies all of a sudden. And my greatest regret, we had the meetings in this parliament downstairs last year. Started the process, and of course COVID has made it difficult to continue, but I give this honorable chamber the commitment that this government will stay focused on changing the structures of our social services, just as we're intending to do with our educational services, just as we're doing now with our criminal justice system. We inherited a Victorian criminal justice system. It is about lick and lock up. What did they say when we emancipated? What was the folk song? Lick and lock up, done with. But yet, we understood it for slavery, but everything else in terms of keeping order in the society relates back to lick and lock up. Well, you may argue that I got rid of the licks with the abolition of the cat and nine one way, but the lockup is still there. And lockup is still needed for genuine criminal offenses. You steal, you rape, you wound, you murder. But there are a number of other areas of activity where the state wants order. But to get order, you don't need to lock up all the time. And that's why the concept of civil penalties, and the Honorable Attorney General will usher in a revolution in this country with respect to the use of civil penalties as opposed to just criminal justice approach that sees everybody going up to Dodds. Now, there is a genuine philosophical issue, and Mr. Speaker, you will appreciate this, and the Leader of the Opposition will as well, too, from when we worked together when I was Attorney General and Minister of Home Affairs. That we would like to be able to extend it also for people with child support. Because the notion of sending somebody to prison for child support is anathema. But they don't go to prison for child support. They really go to prison for contempt of court, for disobeying the court's order. But we need to find a way where that is really the last possible act of the state. And we need to introduce civil penalties on a wider range of stuff. And that's why when you look and read the CARICOM Commission on Marijuana, and you start to understand how the colonial authorities around the world sought to criminalize certain things in order to control persons, in order to criminalize and lock up people, then you begin to understand that we cannot continue. And they themselves done with the lockup. And while I hear the Honourable Member for St. Philip North that you don't go by what others have done, you equally have to deconstruct and reconstruct for ourselves. Now, I came into public life in 1989. Anytime you went near a football match, you didn't smell nothing. You would have to go down in the back, deep down. People used to run and hide and do what they had to do. Over the course of the 3 decades, I've seen a completely different approach. And yes, regrettably, the law is now observed by citizens more in the breach than acknowledged. I recall as Minister of Education making this point many, many years ago. And I recall the then member for St. Michael South Central, the Honourable Sir Richard Haynes, who is no longer with us, came and spoke to me and indicated that this approach to drug addiction in this country is wrong, and that fundamentally we needed to have a public health approach to addiction and not a criminal approach to addiction. At the same time, just as I came back to Barbados as a young lawyer from the United Kingdom, The Economist magazine ran a whole section on it, on the wisdom of decriminalization, largely because something that is not, and this is the difference, the wisdom of legalization, sorry, not decriminalization, because something that is illegal cannot be appropriately regulated, and that more often than not, as was the case in prohibition, the difficulties came with the quality of what people were producing, moonshine, and you didn't know what adding something to poison somebody or give them a bad feel or whatever, because there are no standards to regulate. When you pick up liquor now, you see how it is regulated. When you pick up cigarettes, down to even the warnings that it will cause death, you see how it is regulated. Part of the difficulty, even when we decriminalize and not legalize, is the absence of regulation and the absence of appropriate benefits, including taxation from the sector. So these are the further discussions that we must have as a nation, but we will have them as a nation and we will vote as a nation on legalization. But for now, we say simply, too many young Barbadians, and too many young Barbadians, particularly those from disadvantaged communities, have spent too much time in lockup for something that is now not only legal in most parts of the world, but has been decriminalized in most parts of the world. There's a disconnect that has to be dealt with by the Attorney General and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and that is that the international treaties, and I think the Leader of the Opposition may recall this, because he and I don't know if he recalls, had to deal with the reality that there was a movement at the beginning of the century to go where we are now. But the United States of America blocked it in every single forum in the Americas. And all of the Latin American countries and Canada and a lot of the Caribbean countries were disposed to it. It wasn't as vibrant as it is now, but it was far more active. And therefore, there may have to be a review of treaty arrangements, because in many instances, that will impact what countries can legitimately do going forward. So, Mr. Speaker, I really didn't expect to speak so long. I want to strongly support this bill. I want to say that from the macro perspective, from the helicopter view from where I sit, this is a government that is seeking to claim its own destiny and to remove itself from the shackles of Victorian England, to remove itself from the shackles of a colonial dispensation as to how we treat to our families, how we treat to the 1940s education reforms that have literally strangled us by disadvantaging as much as 40–50% of our population by making them feel that they're failures if they don't pass a common entrance exam. And by a lick and lock up approach, as I said, on every aspect of our laws, so that if I say that you are to do something and you don't do it, immediately you are subject to fine and confine. And I believe that we have agreed, and I hope that the AG and the Law Reform Commission will put us in a position for the replacement of those types of fining and confining provisions with civil penalties where it can happen. There is no doubt that we must decriminalize vending. It is the one thing that has me angry that we've not done it fully because we want to bring a holistic bill. In fact, only yesterday, Cabinet took the instructions for the holistic bill. And I hope that the bill will finally get here by the end of summer, if not before. But you need order. You can't have everybody just going where they want to sell where they want. But that doesn't mean that you lock them up. That doesn't mean that you give them a conviction. And that civil penalties, in many instances, will send the message that you need to send. But it is only when you disobey the court, and the court will always retain the right for confinement because it is the ultimate measure of how a society brings and controls itself. But you don't have to make it the first stop, the second stop, the third stop, the fourth stop. You don't have to. And I trust and pray, therefore, that this simple piece of legislation today will send the message, one, that we are not prepared to sacrifice more of our citizens in this way. But secondly, that this is not a license for young people to start smoking marijuana or drinking alcohol in both, or eating badly with bare fast food, enough sweet drinks, enough sugar. All of those things, the eating badly, the drinking of alcohol, and the smoking from tobacco to cannabis are not for young people. And if we in our homes and we in our communities take the time, and I say, don't preach rough all the time, although you have to do that sometimes. But I say, breads come, let me talk. Because anybody who wants to be fit, anybody who wants not to get diabetes too, anybody who has been given the information and can think for themselves and wants the best for themselves, and then is anchored by a set of family support that reminds them of it, then I believe that we can get through this. And I say so because in all of these things, our actions have to reflect that human beings are multidimensional and will do a range of things. I am perhaps more concerned about the extent to which we do not have strong parental education. And I think that if we can partner, and I reach out to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and to all right-thinking people in this country who are willing, this is our moment, because deep down we know that the real routine that is needed to save children in this country is not from governments, is not from Parliament, but it is from the families. And by family, I don't mean the nuclear family, I mean the extended family as we, as Barbadians, know it. Aunties and uncles, the body that could tell you, look, don't feel like your mother ain't here, I can't talk to you. And all of a sudden, we don't want to talk with, I don't mean at, but talk with young people, as if we don't have a responsibility to help raise them too. We have that responsibility. And Barbadians have this most wonderful way of bridging difficult conversations. Sweet girl, sweet boy, let me have a little word with you, please. There is no conversation that is too difficult for any adult to have with any young person. And I trust and pray that we accept that. For those who may say, well, don't have it at all. My father and my mother used to tell me there are certain things that adults can do, and there are certain things that children cannot do. I leave with this hilarious one because they obviously feel that I talk out too much sometimes, but don't mind. But I've also found that the best way to get home a point is to share a perspective. But what drove home the point that we were children and they were adults for a very long time related to a couple things. One, you couldn't ask them where they were going. Daddy, where you going? Bikaulala. What time you coming back? 10 to. And you say, 10 to what? And he just said 10 to and walk out the house. But that was to let you know he was in charge and you were not. He used to tell us, this is your mother from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. And my wife from 8 at night to 8 in the morning. And the two do not mix. He meant it and you fell into line. Huh? I see Trevor's eyes. I see the honorable member for St. Michael, he's smiling in his eyes. I'm not sure if he's had to use that same phrase. But the bottom line was that you knew who was in charge and you knew what was permissible and what was not. You knew what was right and what was wrong. And therefore I say from this chair and from this floor, if the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and others in this Parliament, others in the Senate, and others across this nation, there are two things that irk me the most now in Barbados. The absence of parental education and control to secure the future of our children, and the nastiness of the country in terms of dumping and bush. And let me salute that young man whose video has gone viral in the last 24 hours for bringing to certainly my attention and others the inappropriate actions, if it is so, of those who are dumping garbage in gully, in near a water source, a spring, in Bath, and not taking into account the consideration of others who have spoken to them. I've spoken to the Minister of Public Works this morning, and I've said that I don't want, when I go up driving up there on Monday, to see any garbage whatsoever. And the member for St. John is also in that ministry. And I expect before tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, that the efforts will have started to remove that garbage, because wrong is wrong. And the government cannot ask other people not to litter if its agents themselves are littering and causing the problem. So those are the two things. I don't want to get distracted. Keeping this country clean and keeping our children safe and raising them properly. Because if they are not there to be good adults in 10 years' time, in 12 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 5 years' time, then God help this country and all of us. So I pray that we will do the right thing. As I said, there is no major piece of legislation that doesn't have risk. That is a fact. And this has some risk. But there are risks that I believe we can manage. There are more right-thinking Barbadians who understand how and what needs to be done. And equally, at the same time, who appreciate that there are too many tens of thousands of Barbadians out there who now need a chance. And who, with this legislation, will not come to feel marginalized or criminalized as a result of it. I want to salute the Honorable Attorney General for helping us with the multiple drafts to get this right. And the draftsmen as well, because there was no precedent to get us where we wanted to get, and therefore we've tried as much as possible for it to reflect what we want to see. I hope it is perfect, but if it is not perfect, we will come here and fix it again, because we know what we want. And what we want is to remove the scourge of criminality from a herb that was used by more of our ancestors for longer than it has been illegal. At the same time, we want that children see and don't see. See and don't touch. How many times you tell a toddler in the house, don't touch? How many times you tell, my grandmother used to tell me, you can't drink coffee. I couldn't drink coffee before I became a teenager, and even as a teenager, they wouldn't let you. We couldn't watch television all up in doing A-levels. I could not watch television from Sunday night, 7 o'clock, till Friday afternoon. You could listen to the radio, you could read books, and you could do homework. And of course, you're outside playing tennis, cricket, squash, whatever you're playing. But you couldn't do those things. And when my father called us out to go and deal with chores around the house, you couldn't be so manners to say that you and we never had no pocket money. Never had pocket money. You want money, you go and work for it. And the reason I'm saying these things is because the older I get, the more I realize that it is in the sharing of these simple things that it gives parents the comfort and the knowledge that you're not a bad parent because you say no. You're not a bad parent because you insist your children got to eat greens. You're not a bad parent because you say no to a child tasting a glass of wine at 12 and 13. No. You're not a bad parent because you love them enough to want to see them grow and not be abused and not be the victim of other people's abuse of them. And I hope and pray, therefore, that this honorable Parliament will understand that in the bringing of this legislation, that this country will understand that in seeking to resolve the injustices on the many, we are not opening up the flood doors on our children, and that we are going to hold hands, honorable member for St. Philip North, and we are going to protect them, and we're going to root them in what is right and what is wrong. And that's why I end on this point. There are too few children going to Sunday school in this country. There are too few children going to church or Sunday school. An adult can choose to come and go as the bishop would know. But there must be a discipline, a foundation, as the Honorable Member for St. Thomas is saying, that they must be taught, and they must be given the opportunity to learn the difference between right and wrong, and why it is that there is a higher being that we call God, and if it's another religion, whatever they call, Allah, whatever. But if you don't root children, when the gale force winds of influence start to come from as early as 9 and 10. Out of the mouths of them comes curiosity. And from curiosity comes what? Trouble. If we don't root them, then anything is liable to happen. And I'd like to suggest that marijuana will be the least of their problems in the absence of rooting them. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill, but more than this bill, I see this as an opportunity for us to treat to the real issues that we want to treat. And I hear both of the last two speakers very clearly, very, very clearly. And I want to join with them and others in this country to mount the battle that I feel that they really are calling for, which is the battles against addiction, the battles against poor parenting, the battles against children, what my uncle used to call latchkey children with nobody to guide them or hold them. And if we can do that, then I feel that we have today not simply passed a bill to remove the injustices to thousands of persons, but we have also reached a moment of maturity that allows us to deal with a problem that has regrettably confounded our nation in this confused journey called independence that has left us relating to people's rights, but has not sufficiently anchored them in their responsibilities to keep the house, the community, the family, and themselves upright and capable of making it through this long journey. I'm obliged to use it.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that we do now suspend the chamber until 2:30.
Question that this honorable chairman be suspended until 2:30 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended until 2 p.m. 2:30 p.m.